Today, I'm very excited to host all of you. Thank you for joining EQ at St. Louis Startup Week 2020 for the Equity in Entrepreneurship panel, Roundtable even. Roundtables are different from panels because they don't need presentations or anything like that. It's just a free-flowing discussion. And we've got Kylie Summers from SpendDebt. We've got Fatimah Muhammad from Apiary at the Park. We've got LaShana Lewis from the St. Louis Equity Collective. We've got Julian Keaton from Dimensions. We've got Tyrean Lewis from Heru Urban Farming. We've got Philip Sangakoya from Brand of STL. And we've got Travis Sheridan, who is from Wexford, but also you will have all known him from Venture Cafe and many other things. So yeah, thanks all of you for joining today. And I'm sure there'll be moments where we can talk specifically about some of the stuff you do. And we'll do a follow-up article too, so we'll be able to share exactly what you do with everyone else. But the reason I wanted to kind of have this discussion is, earlier this year, during sort of 2020, we had a kind of upheaval this summer, and there was a lot of chat on Twitter that said we can't entrepreneur our way out of this. And what was interesting about that was, on one hand, that obviously was true. I don't think that's debatable. But what was also interesting was actually there does seem to be a lot of ways to entrepreneur, our way out of it, and a lot of people seem to be doing that, and particularly in St. Louis. So, there's a lot of founders who've been recognized who run companies in St. Louis have a kind of activist component to the companies they're running. There's a sort of social impact element, and they kind of lean into it. So I wanted to ask, well, A, would you agree with that first, that there is this component? You can just nod or shake your head and I'll take it as a, okay, cool. So what I wanted to ask is this just a coincidence, or is it inevitable, or is it a kind of product of bias among the founders? I mean, not founders, among funders, to kind of only support issues they recognize. And Travis, would you mind speaking to that?
Sure. I mean, there is a bias toward funders. We can get to that secondly. I think this idea that entrepreneurship can be a form of activism, I think that's being addressed by two different sides of the equation. It's being addressed by the founders themselves, and it's also being addressed by the consumers who are making more conscious decisions about how their dollars are being spent. And I think that's a good combination, right? Entrepreneurs are always tasked with securing customers, and part of their brand story and their brand strategy is defining the product, but much more of that brand is the level of activism or their corporate stewardship. Even as a small startup, their level of corporate stewardship. And the consumer base is really expecting that now. And that can be from small consumers all the way up to large corporates who are being more diligent and intentional with their procurement strategies as a way to increase the level of equity. So we can get to the funders comment and bias a little bit later, because I think that is still in place. But when we look at activism, I see two sides of that equation.
Thank you. And that's exactly it. One of the things that I find fascinating is, like, in conventional wisdom around startups and entrepreneurship, the best founders will always draw from their own experience, and you're going to be more successful building a company that is based on what you know. It's like writing. Write what you know. Don't write about what you don't know. And companies are the same. And in that sense, to me, it's like, it's all of those things. You know, it's a coincidence. There's an inevitability to it, and there is bias in play. And I guess what I, to the founders on the panel is like, how much of what you're doing is drawn from your own experience? How much of your company mission is coming from what you know?
I would say that.
Go for it.
I would say that 100% of what I'm doing comes from not just this experience, but my entire life experience. And I'm opposed to just keep resuscitating the same sounds that have been going on for years and years and years, and decided to look into other ways and opportunities to bring about changes. Because this is an ideal time. This situation, the 3 pandemics that we're suffering through at this moment, has brought out creativity and spirit and courage from people that didn't even know that they had that. And it is causing people to stop and take notice. Those folks that are in a position to help bring about a change are noticing and are understanding the lack that has been existing for so long. So my life experiences moved right in tandem with what is going on today, and hopefully that'll bring about a change.
Yeah, thank you. Kylie, do you want to chime in?
No, I agree with Ms. Fatimah. I think all of what we do, here at SpendThat is contribute to, how we were brought up. I come from humble beginnings, right? And so it's, watching a single mother raise 3 boys, struggle with finances, right? We think about financial education in urban communities or in most people's homes, right? It's non-existent. And, as an adult, I had my stumbles and troubles with, my own financial troubles. And, we had a realization like, hey, we need to do something about our financial position in life, or we'll continue that perpetual generational curse or cycle and living, check to check or in poverty. So we made a conscious decision, let's do something about it. And that's how we became debt free. And we wanted to be able to develop a tool to help other people try to break those same chains, right? And maybe it's not to become zeroed out or zero balance from a debt perspective, right? But it may be to control your debt and not let your debt control you, right? I'll say this about debt. Debt is like one of those most powerful resources that we have, right? In like water, right? When water is not contained, it kills people. It's hurricanes, it's floods, right? But when you control water, it's a beautiful thing, right? You can go swimming, right? You can drink from it. It is a resource to improve your life. And so that's how we look at that. And I definitely think my life experiences contributed to how we have built our company.
Yeah, thank you. And Tyrean, I know like some of the observations that you've had is what's driving a lot of what you're doing.
Yeah, so I totally agree with both of the previous panelists. Man, it's definitely my business come from experience and just what I've been through, and that from all aspects. That's debt, what he was talking about as well. But for me, on my side, for my business, just with the food. Just like, for example, I live in a food apartheid community. We know food desert, we say it's naturally done. That's what food desert mean to me. But food apartheid is when it's deliberately done. Like in my neighborhood growing up, like I always see, like, why is it always stuff in our neighborhood that doesn't benefit us? Like we got 1,000 Family Dollars in every corner, gas stations on every corner, and and things of that nature that don't really benefit us. There's abundance of it. You don't see that in other places. So when I started my business, it was just the difference of food quality where I stay, the access to food. Even if certain neighborhoods do have the access, it's night and day between like the Snooks on Union and the Snooks in West County. It's night and day. You go into one in Union, and it's getting a little better over the years when I first started in 2017, but it's still not nowhere to compare to West County. You go in there, they don't even look like a Snooks. I mean, they got just everything everywhere. They got sushi getting cooked, winery, a big plethora of produce, all that.
Yeah, and what's funny is like, or what's interesting is like in both in all the examples you gave, it's like reimagining something else. And, you know, Julian, that's what Dimensions is doing. It's saying, let's use VR and AR to reimagine our own communities. So I sense that yours is also drawn from experience.
Yeah, it is. So to provide some context, like I moved around the country for a bit of the last decade. And each time it was an experience that I had to kind of just adjust and get used to. A lot of times it's in places where I don't have a network. And so you then have to, have to reimagine what your network is, and even in the reality of the world that you're living in. Because specifically for like college students, they're coming from, say, a different city, from a different type of layout, from a different type of structure, not knowing what St. Louis has to offer. And so you have to create that like shared experience of like what's actually here. But then also like a lot of why St. Louis is the history. And because if they don't have that history piece, a lot of college students and as well as transplants won't really get the foundational contextual understanding of why St. Louis is the way that it is. And so being able to do that VR and AR component definitely helps people kind of see and actually experience what it means to have to be acclimated and get adjusted and relive or live the experience of being a new transplant.
Yeah. And I guess where I'm, what I find fascinating is this is no different from any entrepreneur, right? So all entrepreneurs are drawing on their own experiences. All entrepreneurs are making the world a better place. And so, so I've got kind of two sides of the question there. It's like, it's almost like you're leaning into social impact. So there's a kind of social impact messaging about what you're doing, but actually the intention is to lead out of it into this general category and show that these aren't kind of, specific issues just to, your communities. There are issues that affect everyone, but the lens kind of, this is where we start and then kind of broaden out to bigger categories or, to general categories. And I guess, the thing I've been struggling with is like, should we name this category of, activist, entrepreneur, or is it just general? I guess Philip or LaShana, I was wondering if you have thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah. I think, from my perspective, being a banker, kind of banking industry focused on trying to help entrepreneurs get loans and that kind of thing, that experience made me realize that entrepreneurs are different with different industries, different approaches. And it's tough to kind of categorize kind of things sometimes, because then it makes it easy to kind of judge and stereotype those categories. So I think just kind of considering my background and then growing into Brand of St. Louis with our social enterprise, we're focused more on how do we make sure that the right ecosystem resources for entrepreneurs actually reach them and actually, are catered to them. And I think that's where there's a difference in how you market a product, how you create a product for an entrepreneur based on their background, based on their history, based on their, honestly, their trust with the industry, whether it's banks or other entities. So I think you have to come with a different approach. And, to your point earlier, I think entrepreneurship is always identifying problems and identifying gaps and solving to it. That's no different. I just, whenever you have a disproportionate amount of people who have a similar experience that maybe isn't with the Black community in leadership, in decision making, whether it's banks or other organizations, you then see things in your own view, in your siloed view, and that you just have to bring in other people to kind of help create the solution. So we're all about co-creating solutions that really bring in every race, every demographic, and their needs to the table, and not just the needs of the people who maybe are coming top of mind to you or are easiest to sell to, right? So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah.
And to bounce off of what Philip was saying, and Philip and I work together with the Equity Collective. We tend to say that we can't solve something until we name something, but you can do some things. For instance, I'm Black queer woman. You may not know what to categorize me or call me, but if I'm sick, I go to a doctor and I need that doctor to help me and cure me. That doctor doesn't need to know all my labels in order to start the process of helping me. If it's obvious that my arm is cut off, you don't really need to know a lot about me in order to figure out that that's a major problem for me and something needs to be done. Then maybe you need to get granular down and get into my history a little bit in order to kind of do some other things that are more finite. And I think the thing is that we get conflated with problem solving and naming something. And we end up in this analysis paralysis, which is one of the things that I am fighting with the Equity Collective to stop people from doing. Saying, people are like, I can, help, but I need you to lay out the plan. And I'm like, okay, there's not really a plan. There's guidelines, there's a framework, okay? But we may get into it and find out that the issue isn't that, for instance, an ESO needs more training. Maybe they've had all the diversity training in the world. Maybe that's not the problem. We do need to address the framework of equity issues, okay? That's a framework, but we may not be doing the right solution for them. So we need to look a little deeper and say, what is your specific problem that you're having? Listen, and then say, okay, well, your solution might be you actually need someone to go into your initiatives, or you've had this SOP that's been around since 1960, and you're working off of standard operating procedures from there. And that's why everything is starting to be so difficult for you, because your customer base is changing from when you formulated the company or when you were starting to put together the idea for what it is. So it comes from a variety of different things. And I think what we forget about is that, you can do both. Naming something is important, but also doing some work until you figure out the name is also just as equally important.
Well, and thank you for saying that, because I think that's exactly what I see, as an observer from the outside. I see entrepreneurs of color, taking on a lot of risk to solve issues that governments should have solved already, and in a way, again, what's interesting about that though is that goes back to classic startup disruptive behavior. Uber, what's the one with all the scooters, Line Bike, and all of that. They're birds. They're dropping. They're dropping, all these kind of personal transport vehicles all over the cities to kind of disrupt a kind of public transport policy in the government. And in a lot of ways, I feel that what's so exciting about what families of color are doing in St. Louis, which is what I know closer, but I know, Kylie's operating out of Texas and things like that, is like, using entrepreneurship to do a kind of issue discovery, and I guess the question is like, are you taking on too much risk or not enough? And how do we recognize the risk and create more structures and just acknowledge, look, there's all this risk being taken, go to cities and say, given that these are all social impact entrepreneur, issues, shouldn't the city be contributing money to the funds, like a match funding program or something like that?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I look at the co-working spaces as they started to pop up all over the United States, but specifically here in St. Louis, I don't think there was ever a thought to move a space such as the apiary into North St. Louis. And it just seems ironic in that the amount of unemployment, the amount of disparities, the amount of entrepreneurs that are located in this area would appear to be a prime location for the definition of what a co-working space is. Instead, it has been centered in an area where the economics of those entrepreneurs is such that they may not need all of the services, the financial backing, the mentors, all of those wraparound services that come with the space that the apiary provides, they don't need that, but it's provided. So there's an imbalance in just looking at where businesses are placed and why they are placed there. And to speak on transportation, to speak on community development, all of that is encompassed based on your residence, your location, as well as the business entities that are there. So until those things are addressed, it continues to be a hindrance to the north side of St. Louis. It continues to be a hindrance to the striving entrepreneurs. And now we have not only the social and serial entrepreneurs, we have the 50+ entrepreneurs who are at a point in their life, maybe they've retired and they realize my benefits are not enough for me to survive on. And so again, coming from their personal experiences, they dig into those talents that they have and start to look at all of the opportunities. But to speak to what LaShana has said, they start that process and here come all of the labels, the blocks, and the understanding of why, what, and when, instead of figuring out how to fit into that individual's box.
I wanted to respond to that just quickly. I think one of the key points that I wanted to pull out of that is that the government, by its nature, puts on a lens of innovation that they look at an innovative decision that's going to have the greatest likelihood of success, right? So for like using a hockey analogy, they want to take a shot on goal when there's an empty net. Right? And there's nobody defending it, that like all the barriers are removed so that they can claim success for that innovative decision. And what the general public actually responds to is, we live in a place, living in North St. Louis, we live in a place where there's not just one goalie, there are multiple goalies. There are a lot of people that are trying to block us from success, and we're still taking the shots.
Yeah.
And it requires oftentimes people of color, and in St. Louis, Black people, to take shots with multiple things stacked against them, as opposed to looking for more balance and having maybe the government or other agencies and entities play a role in removing some of those barriers that get in the way. And I think that, Jonathan, you brought up a good point there. Many people try to innovate against the government because the government is slow, whether it's transportation systems or even a product like TurboTax that tried to innovate because the bureaucracy and complexity of the IRS. Like you want to innovate to simplify things, to make things easier for the consumer. So that's been happening across the board. I think people of color have been doing it not just to innovate to make things easier, but they've been doing it for the means of survival, because other people have not been innovating in that area.
Yeah, I would also add just, it's not just the government, right? It's also private corporations. It's business models in general under capitalism that are going to say, how do we make sure we do going to have proven and planned success? And I think that's where we have to redefine and reframe what risk is, to your question, Jonathan, of, what is the risk that we're taking by not investing in North City? What is the risk that we're taking in not investing in African-American business owners and those communities? And I think we have plenty of data now that shows what you're risking at that point, which is widening that racial equity gap. And I think once you reframe that risk, then it's easier to make the decision as to why to invest in an environment, in a situation, in a group of entrepreneurs that maybe have rounds, because you know that everyone has to survive to be successful globally. And I think once you redefine and reframe what risk really is, it becomes a decision for governments, for private corporations, even for nonprofits and foundations to say, we almost have to make this investment into these American entrepreneurs and these African-American businesses. Otherwise, we are never going to get to close this racial equity gap, which is impacting everybody.
Yes, and I'd love to respond to that quickly. And then I know Julian's got his hand up. But, that's what I very much appreciate about the work that's kind of come out of St. Louis in, the last 12 months, with the Equity Collective, with We Power, with the Arms of DEI Accelerated Today, is like, at least these organizations are coming in and essentially saying there's an opportunity cost. If we don't do anything, this is the opportunity cost. And these entrepreneurs, whether they succeed or not, they're going to have identified and quantified the opportunity cost before anyone else gets around to doing it, before the civic institutions get around to doing it. And I know, LaShana, you've spoken about that on EQ as well. But Julian, you had a comment. Do you want to chime in?
Yeah. So, I mean, my thoughts are very, similar to Travis and Philip in that regard. I think it is the responsibility of governments to solve certain social issues. However, I think that most entrepreneurs don't have that same level of bureaucracy when it comes to like governing people, policy, and ideas. And so entrepreneurs are able to truly be grassroots and have the flexibility and the agility to kind of work within the community to solve these various issues. And kind of similar to Philip, my take is, what's the risk of not solving these issues while we wait for governments and politicians to fulfill campaign promises? And even then, I think campaign promises are really a means to activate people and want to go out and fulfill some of these things, the issues that we need to address. It's the entrepreneurs that live, sleep, and eat in these communities that live with these social issues that the governments are trying to solve. So why not do our civic duty to make these communities more prosperous and livable for ourselves and those around us?
I love what you said, Julian. I mean, what you said is we can entrepreneur our way out of it. It's totally valid to attempt to do that. And it's valid everywhere else too. AI is entrepreneuring out of a lot of massive, civic issues too. And in that sense, going back to kind of these structural issues, right? There's definitely kind of structural issues around funding and capital and distribution of capital. And then there's kind of softer issues around, Philip, Brand of St. Louis did the study, and you identified that growth mindset is this kind of soft factor or soft skill factor. So you've got hard factors like distribution of capital and soft factors like growth mindset. And that's where, creating, is it possible to temporarily create a category of investment or an investment vehicle that sort of accelerates a lot of this work in the opportunity discovery opportunity cost discovery part of entrepreneurship? So that we're not kind of stuck in, things can only succeed or fail, but we can turn all ventures into creating kind of useful data exhaust about that's useful in itself. Sorry, I've kind of bungled that question. But does any of those comments resonate or?
Maybe just start and let Travis share as well. But just from our theory of change, we really thought about what promotes and gets in the way and maybe inspires collaboration within Black communities. And there was a study that we worked with the Brown School of Social Work as well, in collaboration with the African Chamber and the Heartland Black Chamber. And we really realized that at the end of the day, you do need to make sure that there is a growth mindset, both with leadership, with entrepreneurs, to say, hey, inspire and impact change. But I think the category that you have to really focus on is outcomes-based versus inputs and outputs. Because I think inputs and outputs will say, hey, how many jobs did we create, quote unquote, or, that kind of thing. But I think the outcomes are really, did we close the racial equity gap in wealth? Did we close the racial equity gap in income? Did we increase the amount of savings that African-American families have in X zip code, right? So once you start getting hyper-focused on those outcomes, it's much easier to kind of pinpoint what's actually making impactful change, which nonprofits, which corporations, which businesses that are in our communities are actually making change, because then you start asking for different data metrics. And I think until we get to that point of that outcomes-based categories, I think that's when we'll really see, maybe then you kind of make a racial equity subgroup, because then you could say everybody in this subgroup is actually closing the racial equity gap because they're showing the data, showing the outcomes, and that's what allows them to be in the subgroup. And then maybe you fund that subgroup. So, it's possible to do a category like that, I suppose.
I love that distinction between outcomes and outputs. And And I think that's the kind of part of where the question is. I mean, I think we all know intuitively categorization is not the way to go, right? But it's like, but there's this element of like, there needs to be common understanding of the issues that people would attempt to solve, that entrepreneurs might select to solve, you know. And if there's no investor at the other end that understands, you know, what a food desert is, you know, or how important co-working is in North City, or any of these kind of issues, then we can't solve the funding gap. So you're right, maybe it's a case of creating an outcomes-based accelerator, you know, open to everyone. And that's the category of entrepreneurship, that there's loads of startups that want to solve kind of these borderline issues with civic. Oh, sorry, Travis.
No, I think the moment we shift the goalpost or change the goalpost for the Black community is the moment that we have said that outcomes aren't important, right? If you're raising venture capital, the outcome that matters most is return of shareholder value. Like that is what that is it. It's not what did you learn from the experience or anything like that. It's return of shareholder value. If we expect something different from Black, brown, or women, female entrepreneurs and say, we'll take something that's not return of shareholder value and we're gonna lower the bar, then I think we are compromising the entire equation. That is the output that matters to investors. Now, activist investors or programs like Arch Grants that might be about that where it's not an equity investment, that might be different. The other piece of it is, and this goes back to the very first question, and really I appreciate what Fatimah and Kylie said, is that we talked a lot about lived experiences. And that's where bias comes into play. Like people gravitate toward lived experiences in which they understand. I mean, that is where bias is. If I understand your lived experience, then I am more inclined to partner with you, spend time with you. And so our current venture capital community has a lived experience, their upbringing, where their sources of their sources of wealth have come from. Their lived experience means that they are going to invest in companies that have a similar DNA and lived experience. So until we either do double blind investing and remove some of the filters so that people can look at applications and deals without the labels that they throw on them initially, just through our own lenses, or we have more Black wealth so that there's more lived experiences that can align, which is a longer trailing solution. I think double blind and removing some of the changing the investor process is a little bit shorter term, more immediate solution.
So what's interesting, Travis, is that you talked, you know, I totally agree about this. We can't, we have to stick to the rules of venture capital. You know, we have to stick to return of shareholder value. And what's interesting is the public conversation about that is quite complicated. You know, Andreessen Horowitz this year launched $1 million fund in which every investment they make must return back to the fund, and then it just kind of keeps investing on that basis. But they got hugely criticized for doing that, because they were like, well, you've got billions of dollars. Why are you only doing this small $1 million fund? But to some degree, I think that they were actually authentically trying to address part of the problem, which is we need to start somewhere. And actually that fund was created completely out of the owners of the fund. It wasn't, you know, it's just the partners putting their own cash in. And then you've got it on the other side, right? You've got the vision, you know, SoftBank doing the new fund, which is 100 million, but it's on that activist investor side. So, and then one of the things about the double blind stuff is, isn't the worry there, or isn't one of the complications there, that some of the, you know, impact entrepreneurship that's happening, or some of the pitches that do lean into social impact, actually kind of get eliminated from being a double blind test application?
Well, I mean, I think every venture, whether it's a social impact venture, a purely commercial venture, or a nonprofit, needs to have a business model associated with it. Like, I mean, I mean, you have to have some level of longer term sustainability. And I mean, I think that, I don't look at deals differently based on how they file their taxes or what they do with their profits. I look at business differently based on what is their business model, what's the leadership, and what's the ability to make this a successful venture. Because I think one of the things that happens, especially in social impact, is that a new organization or entity is launched. It has initial impact and then it fails because it does not have a long-term model associated with it. And that could actually do more harm than good in the short term and long term.
Mm.
I will say, I think we're maybe kind of blurring several conversations together, VC investments as well as corporate citizenship and corporate social responsibility, right? So I want to make sure I'm clear that when I'm kind of speaking about really raising the bar for social responsibility, the question should be, in addition to all those profits for your shareholders, what are you doing for the communities that you're located in, that you're taking up space in? And I think once you start holding that as the accountability metrics, that's going to force corporations, VC capital firms even, to say, hey, who can we work with at the grassroots level that will help us actually answer that question? You start getting into how do you fund entrepreneurs, corporations with those larger entities. So I think entrepreneurs should not have to have that onus of impacting the racial equity gaps on their own. I think entrepreneurs should just focus on whatever their product is to do well. I think it then becomes the question of what are these larger corporations that are already maximizing profits, right? That's great, but what's that next level if you're going to take up space in a community, if you're going to truly be a corporate citizen, or if you're going to say that you're doing social good? How do we raise the bar on what it means to actually do social good and that accountability?
And Philip,
No,
what's
if I can interject, I agree with both Travis and Philip. I think corporate responsibility is hugely important, right? Because we are consumers. The Black community are, extreme consumers when it comes to these corporations and where they set up shop, right? But I think, if I can argue the point, on the other side of really early on, it's like we need, if we're not going to change, to Travis' point, we're not going to change the metric of how we measure success from a VC perspective, then we know that our communities are not getting funded. The start line is completely different, right? And so we need that runway to fail, right? To understand what those short-term and long-term impacts could be, right? But we're not given that opportunity. And I think that limits the type of solutions that we can create for the communities that we live in and prosper within. And I think we need to be thinking about that. And how do we think about that? And how do we lean into corporations? How we lean into VCs to really go further upstream to allow us those chances to fail, because we don't have those family and friends rounds. We don't have the rich uncles or what have you to get us from the idea phase to that first MVP.
I often think back to when there was segregation. And that makes me think about civic responsibility. And the reason I say that is there was a point when neighborhoods and the residents supported their own businesses. So the local grocery stores, the filling stations, the shoe shine parlors, the cleaners, all of those things were supported by the community. And so the whole geometric redesign of neighborhoods and communities is what has caused such a huge disinvestment in our areas. One thing that everybody knows is that Black people are the #1 consumers. And so they said, let's get away from the segregation because look at the money that we're missing. So that's all been by design. And whether we like it or not, that is the reality. It was done by design. So now we're at a standstill in some situations where it's almost, you have to be beholden to these people that really hold the money springs. And that should not be the case. It still falls back on community and those folks that support you. Am I opening a multi-million-dollar business? It's going to be that, but I'm starting in steps. I'm moving according to the way that I have to move at this time with the support of the community first, because they will help me to speak volumes and to open the ears of those that are really controlling the money and the power. But if you've got your community backing you, then that's a huge step, because the community and the development and all of that helps to bring the success about in a business structure. So we may not be able to start with a $100 million project, but that grassroots and getting the folks engaged and involved, in my opinion, is one of the key steps in moving forward.
Well, and I think again, it's all on. This is also the path of the entrepreneur, right? Every entrepreneur is making the choice of, I want to go on this adventure, come what may. And that's exciting. Like, it's normal. I wanted to say something. I did want to just respond to one thing, but well, that was it. Philip's point, and then we'll go to Travis. But Philip's point about outcomes, I think, is very interesting. The truth is outcomes is for everyone as well. The outcomes methodology is for all startups. Like, every startup in St. Louis has a risk of failure too, right? Every startup bears that risk. And actually, we're all creating temporary jobs and all kinds of things that don't get reported. So that, when we kind of crash and burn, it's like, the story is only about failure, but what's missing is, well, actually, we created 10 jobs in that process, or we got to 30 hires in that process before we ran out of money, and those are kind of conversations that I personally need to get into the community as well about, say, what I'm doing, or all entrepreneurs need that. So actually, I think both Travis and Philip, but your points are actually simpatico, right? It's like, we need to bring outcomes to everyone. And in fact, in terms of investing, there's a change now towards impact investing in Europe, where they're saying, look, the environmental impact of a company should have accounting principles like GAAP, so generally accepted accounting principles. Like, companies should be measured, their impact on the environment should be measured in that formal way. And arguably, I think, startups' impact on their communities, whatever community it is, could be measured in a formal way. So yeah, Travis.
Yeah, I just wanted my last thought on this topic is that I get really nervous around this whole concept of failure. I've said a number of times that we build ecosystems that make failure celebratory as opposed to something that truly is tragic. And I think especially in the Black community, failure of an enterprise can be cataclysmic. It could mean, going without food because the risk that is associated with it.
Right.
But the other side of the side of success that I see the most in the Black community is the Black community's willingness to support one another. I saw in the chat somebody had mentioned some of the crowdfunding, but it even goes back to, if my neighbor creates a new barbecue sauce, the likelihood is I'm going to buy their barbecue sauce because I want to try their barbecue sauce. Or if I look at my younger brothers, if one of my brothers creates a new CD or a new album, I'm going to probably download that album because I want to listen to their music, right? I think that the Black community has a history of supporting the rest of the Black community. That support has to be enough to carry through that pit of despair and low point, so that the rest of the community, the white community specifically, can also find a way to support these entrepreneurs.
Can I have a point? So, I agree with everybody and Ms. Fatimah as well. But my personal opinion, I believe, history always repeats itself. It's proof. If you see a duck, it's a duck, right? So my thing is, no one haven't been helping us to this point. So I think it is our responsibility. I mean, and like you say, like if you have a product in the community and you like somebody creates something, I'm gonna buy it from them. So I just think we need to help ourselves first and foremost. And that just was just, actually getting together. Like you go to these other communities, they got, you got a Jewish neighborhood, you got Chinatown, you got all these different towns, and we just scatter, and we don't really have that close-knit community like we used to. So I just think, we all just, I don't know how that looks. We all just come together and have our own community set up, and we all spend money with each other. All that stuff we talking about is gonna play itself out. It's a point to just be on our one accord. And if somebody want to come and help, then that's fine. But I think it's our responsibility. For example, I never knew I was gonna have a drug rehabilitation program, like hiring people that's addicts. But I had to do that. I live around it. They asking for work. I've given them work. I'm watching them do better. I'm watching them not be around the same crowd. But that's something I have to do. I wasn't thinking about that at first. That's just something I ad-lib. Like I'm like, oh man, I got to do something. I just hire a couple of them, put them to work, and then you just see the energy changing. And it's our responsibility. I must just, if I don't do it, then something gonna happen. He might end up running in my house or anything. So I gotta help. If I don't help, who gonna help? Nobody else have been helping us to this far. So.
And Tyrean, I want to come back to you because I think you've got some interesting philosophy around that. LaShana, do you still want to chime in?
As most folks who actually know me, I have a lot to say, but I'm trying to curate it for this particular format because I'm not the only speaker. But two things: consumerism and scarcity. Two things that we forget that the Black community were taught over and over and over and over again. You must consume, you must consume, you must consume, and there's not enough. So you need to fight with someone else that is your neighbor to get whatever it is that you need to get. And because of that, we don't leave a space in the middle for entrepreneurship. We don't leave a space in the middle for innovation. Kind of even hearkening back to the fact that a lot of us know that some people are doctors because their father was a doctor or their uncle was a doctor. Who do we know in our lives that were entrepreneurs, business owners? A lot of us don't. A lot of us don't have that. So as a result, we get whatever the regular programming, the regularly scheduled broadcasting is, which is consume and scarcity. So one of the things that we forget about when we're looking at entrepreneurs is that we assume that everybody comes from the same background, that everybody came to entrepreneurship through the same pathway, through the same walkway, and that's not it. I actually had to deprogram myself from consumerism and scarcity to be able to make room for entrepreneurship so that I could think of ideas to come forward and say, I need to find out the process behind creating this idea, monetizing it even. But until I got to that point, all I was doing was just blah, 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 blah. They should do this and they should do that. No, I should. I needed to do something. So when we're thinking about all of this, we also need to start on the ground root level of the training and the programming that we have within ourselves and within our community, and be able to break those chains and say, we need to come from a different walkway. We need to come through a different path into a different light. That's all I got to say.
Important. No, that was genius. It was worth it. What's so important about what you said is Black entrepreneurship isn't a monolith. Equity in entrepreneurship isn't a monolith. It's like tons of issues, and every founder is kind of doing sort of discovery on behalf of the monolith in a lot of ways. But actually it's this huge discovery process. And I know you've got your hand raised, Travis, and but I did want to just kind of shout out some other things, like in Philip's study with Chevelle, they talked about growth mindset. And one of the kind of key things that they said was, you've got to share your leadership. Leaders can't kind of keep all the strategies for themselves. They've got to share it. And, Tyrean, one of the things that I love about your little company, is you called it Heru Urban Farming, and that Heru was like can I share it? That it's a special name to you. It's like it's a spiritual name for you. And what I love about that is, that's just a mode of kind of sharing your leadership, essentially, and other people are doing that, yeah, this kind of mode of sharing leadership's kind of, so I've lost it there, but oh, it was an old hand raise.
No, you fine. So what I'm thinking is, all right, so my name is Heru, which is Heru, my spiritual name is Heru Jajedi Adeleke. That means the crown, triumph, the strength of a king. So I put it in my business because I want to liberate my people. So, you know, Heru by itself is King Liberator. And I truly want to do. And I think it's more of just an energy thing. It's a feel thing. You know, it start there. It's just, I noticed once I started this, and it took other people in the neighborhood to tell me that. It was like, did anybody know who you was before you first moved over? I'm like, nah, you know, that's what I do it is. So I have the privilege to know, man, I know everybody from St. Louis Avenue and all the way up to Northland, like in my little, you know, community right there. And it's just the energy, you just tell. It's just the youth is seeing you doing something, like making something out of nothing. You just talking to people, just being in tune, and you just start there, you know, like asking them what they need, what they want. I mean, I know it, but I want to ask you too. Mine might be different. You may be my neighbor, mine might be different from you. So just getting out there, just mingling, getting the thoughts together. You start there, and then you move on, and actually put your 10 toes down and get it going. That's all.
Right, and that's normal. You use the name of your company to kind of encode a certain energy or a certain story that gives you power. I mean, my last company was called Long Neck and Thunderfoot, you know, and it was about two dinosaurs scared of each other but have to collaborate to survive the extinction. That gave me energy. That was a way of sharing my leadership, you know, for anyone who cared to listen, you know. I feel like, you know, these are important aspects. We can't forget the stories to tell aren't just ones of success or failure either. Fatima, you had a quick comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to expound on Heru's comment, because that was just so heartfelt for me, in that the community kind of set up the tone for me. It was an awakening while running for office here that I realized all of the lack in my neighborhood. And it just kept resonating over and over and over. And it's so I've had 4 decades and 5 successful brick and mortar businesses, and not one of them was supported by an outside funding force. The typical outside funding forces. And they've been in the Central West End, they've been in Maplewood, they've been in Chesterfield. So I am just as much a victim. In my mind, I was moving my culture to other areas in hopes that they would see, and then pivoted back to this area. Instead, I had to regroup and say, no, I need to start here and move it out. Because one of the things that is so distressing for me is the fact that we sit on real estate. We're sitting on real estate that is prime real estate. And as Travis mentioned, everybody is looking for their return, but the first thing they're looking for is to bring that investment probability down. So if you have no residents, you have no businesses, you've got vacant lots, that means your investment initiative is very small, but the returns are huge. And so sometimes it takes us as a people to say, I'm going to go to a place that's not so comfortable to start this process so that notoriety can begin to come here and change the community in its course.
I love what you're saying. And again, it's yes, you choose the challenge, you know, authentically choose the adventure yourself. But, you know, going back to outcomes, like, it's interesting because you're right, like, you're going to learn, and you're going to learn about land use in your neighborhood, right? That will be shareable skills to other entrepreneurs. Tyrean, you know, is learning about land use and urban farming, and where there's all this land that could be kind of repurposed. It seems like there's a kind of exhaust of like useful insights that can go back to create new entrepreneurs. You know, it's like, oh, look, I couldn't solve this, but I came across this issue. Can someone else go and solve it? And I guess I wonder if that's where, you know, the collective can play a role, you know, the equity collective, in kind of channeling those insights and opportunities and saying, by the way, this needs to be disrupted too. Julian, you've been silent, but I'm sure you've got some things to say.
Yeah, so I guess I take a more general approach to what everybody's kind of talked about, and kind of in reference to what we're doing with dimensions, right? So what the type of work that we're doing, it's much larger than really just acclimating college students and transplants, right? We understand that our region is making investments specifically in the Central Corridor to attract talent, whether that's folks that are recently graduates or folks that are like that middle-aged, like 30 bracket trying to find new work, right? But in the process of that, we have all of this land. We have a lot of vacant space. Like, I'm a resident of Walnut Park, right? Where there's neighborhoods like mine are all across North City and West City, where you see vacant lots, you see broken down homes, you see no businesses, you see all of these things, a disinvestment from the last 30, 40 years since white flight. And, you know, for me, it wasn't about waiting for government. It wasn't about wanting to see universities come into my community and invest into my community. It was really about how can we as individuals, whether we're entrepreneurs or not, provide feedback on how we really want to see our communities built. And, you know, in context, like 6, 7 generations back, my family were farmers that owned land in Mississippi, and we're one of the largest farmers and landowners in Mississippi. And so for that inspired me to fully understand, like, all right, if my family historically has always been leaders when it came to being able to feed people and guide people, you know, how can I position myself to be a leader here in St. Louis, to be able to support young, old entrepreneurs, creatives, to be able to have a fulfilled life? And I think the work that all of us that are in this discussion, this roundtable, we're doing is the change agency that needs to happen for us to really liberate and elevate us as people. And I think it's interesting how we continue to try to say that we're either victims or not, but I think at the end of the day, we have to wake up each day and somehow be motivated and inspired to get the job done. That job is different for every single person, but at the end of the day, it's a matter of, you know, making sure your family is fed, making sure you have a roof over your head, but also making sure that your neighbors and your close friends are also mentally, physically, spiritually healthy. And if we aren't doing that work, then what are we really doing?
Thank you, Julian. And sadly, we're right at the top of the hour, so we're going to have to call it. I'm happy to keep running on if you want to, but just for the attendees, you know, people have got other places to be. But thank you also, Julian, for, that was a nice summary of this discussion. And, you know, I wrote this as the introduction that I never read out, but you're all role models for the future, founders of color, and through your own endeavors are natural leaders of their equity ecosystem in St. Louis. You know, the empowering context of our conversation is to create a space for others to recognize the courage in themselves to pursue their own dream of work, highlight career paths and business opportunities in the city, as well as prepare them with info that improves their odds of success. And hopefully, would you all agree? I think we did that today. Travis, it sounds like you've closed us out.
There's been too many powerful things to say for me to add anything to it. I have a lot of respect for my brothers and sisters that are on this call, taking big chances, not just to improve their station in life, but to improve the lives around them. And I have tremendous respect for that.
Cool, thank you. All right, I'll stop recording. I won't close the session, but if you want to leave or if you want to stay on and debrief, let's do it.